And it's 4 days to elections. All Ghanaians of sound mind, 18 years and above, on Monday will be in the queue to elect a leader. On Tuesday, December 1, we hosted an officer from the Rent Control Department talking about elections and rent-related matters. Because from experience, and depending on which party wins the elections, the possibility of rancor between landlords and their tenants, if they both belong to different political parties, and especially if the tenant supports the winning party and the landlord's party loses. In some cases, tenants have been thrown out, sometimes for jubilating after declaration of results. And if you have not paid your rents at that time, it could be worse. So what does the law say about this? Public Relations Officer for the Rent Control Department of Ghana, Emmanuel Hovekposu, joins us again in the studio to continue from where we left off last week. Share with us if you have a similar story or at least know someone who has been there on WhatsApp number 0540109009. The number is on your screen and I will be reading it here. You can also ask your questions and I will ask him for the response. So this shouldn't have been a problem. Let me welcome you first on the polls, but of course it's an election and we all can't be or support the same ideology. So it shouldn't have been a problem at all. Why are we going through this?
Thank you, Aisha, for this opportunity. You know, when you look universally, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights has given each person in the world some fundamental human rights and freedom. But when you come specifically into our Constitution, if you look at Article 12.2, he has given us, as Ghanaians, our freedom, and then that's human right and freedom. But in exercising our freedom and then our rights, you have to consider the freedom and right of the other person, and then the public interest as well. So in exercising your freedom as a landlord, where we have to dwell in specifically now, as a landlord, if you are expressing your freedom and right, you still need to consider your tenants. And as a tenant, if you are also expressing your right, you need to consider your co-tenants as well as your landlord. So you just as the comment you made, this shouldn't have been a problem. But you know, some people over-jubilate and some people overreact, and which constitutes certain offenses under the Act. When you look at Section 25, there are series of offenses that when you commit as a tenant, the landlord can use that to order for eviction. So some of the offenses there are causing nuisance and annoyance. When you want to dwell in specifically, being in a political party, let's assume your party have won the election. You need not to over-jubilate to cause annoyance to your fellow tenants who are on the other side of the party, or even your landlord. And as a landlord too, if your party has won and somebody has come to rent your premises, you shouldn't take advantage of that and then causing what we call an inducement to that person. You just be doing things that, for instance, if you cannot stay, then leave. It constitutes an offense. These are specific offenses that has been stipulated under the Rent Act, which we are just cautioning all landlord and tenants to be adhered to, so that before, during, and after the election, we all live peacefully with no cause of people coming to the Rent Control Department with summons or with problems that we have to solve. So we are just promoting this piece, that we should know all our rights and responsibilities as landlord. We should know our rights and responsibilities as tenants, so that during this period we can live in harmony and then we stay.
I'm happy that you made the point that people should jubilate moderately so they don't offend the other partners who are on the other side. But considering the fact that we're human beings and of course people go beyond boundaries when they are overexcited, what's your definition of moderate? Because your definition of moderate may not be the same definition of moderate to another person.
Okay, so our definition, so this comes to mind that if a tenant in the face of a landlord, you assume that some offense has been committed, you, the landlord, has no right to forcefully eject the tenant from your premises. The first point of call is to come to the rent control with your problem. We invite the two of you, do an investigation and make determination. it will be very difficult to measure the level of annoyance or this thing, as you mentioned. So that's why we invite the two people, listen to them. And if there is a need for us to get witnesses, we invite the witnesses so that we make sure we settle the case. The motto for the department is to promote peace and reconcile parties. This is the motto we have at the Rent Control Department. So in all cases, no matter how grieved you come to our office, we make sure before you leave our office, you live in peace, you live in harmony. So the level of the annoyance, as you mentioned, will be determined when we get the two of them and listen to them and then try to resolve the issue.
Interesting, but of course, you cannot stop me from jubilating. The law permits me freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of association. So as a landlord or a landlady, you cannot tell me which party to belong to, and you cannot tell me not to jubilate when I'm happy. You cannot suppress my happiness. What does the law say? What are the provisions? Okay,
so just as you mentioned, in exercising your freedom, your fundamental freedom, you need to consider the right of the other person. You also need to consider the public interest. I just want to quote what Section 12(2) of the Constitution states. And in a nutshell, what the article is telling us that we all have our freedom and a fundamental human right. But in exercising it, we have to consider the right of the other person, and we have to consider the public interest. So this fundamental, you have the right for privacy, you have the right to freedom of movement, right to everything. But the caution is that when you are exercising it, make sure your other person is not offended. So the level of it has to be determined by somebody else. That's why you don't have the right as a landlord to determine if an offense has been committed, and then based on that, you try to evict a tenant from your premises. So this is the caution we are sending to all the landlords and tenants.
It's quite interesting how this pans out, because I've seen a number of issues with regards to this. People can't even jubilate in their homes because they know that once they do that, they would have problems with their landlord or their landlady because they are on the different side of the divide. But of course, this is a national event. It's a constitutional right. Nobody can take that away from someone. A number of comments are coming on our page, our WhatsApp page. I know a lot of people are going through this. Let's take a few of the comments and see what people are talking about. Okay, so please, no calls. Let's send messages, and don't be harsh in your messages. Just state your point, no insults. Let me start with this one. It said, okay, I don't know what you're trying to say. Let me pick this one. He said, I'll be extremely appreciative if your robust broadcasting corporation can help me reach. Okay, so he's talking about something else. Let's look at this one. Okay, so when you meet young people, okay, so some of them are talking about different things, but I'm just looking out of, please, no calls. Please don't call the numbers on your screen. It's a WhatsApp line. Just send your message. We'll read them here. If you have a question, send it. We'll ask for you, and then we'll get answers to your questions. If you don't have any of these, don't call the numbers. All right, so,
okay, so now, sorry, just whilst we're looking for, I wanted to quote specifically Article 12(2).
Okay.
And it states, that is the chapter 5, the fundamental right and freedom of our constitution. And it states, every person in Ghana, whatever is race, place of origin, political opinion, this is where the emphasis is, political opinion, color, religion, creed, or gender, shall be entitled to the fundamental human right and freedom of the individual concerned in this chapter, but subject to the respect for the right and freedom of the others and for the public interest. So just as we are mentioning, if you are jubilating, you have the right. That's your fundamental human right. But in exercising it, you have to consider the right of the other person. We assume you just want to jubilate. You put your sound system on where it's playing your political song. You have to consider the privacy of the other person who is also dwelling in the same premises. So that's why we are mentioning you can jubilate, but do it that you do not offend somebody.
And as you're exercising your right, you must be responsible at the same time. Let me take this one from Van Zyl. He says, I was in the Volta region when MPP won elections. I was in a rented house where the landlord told me to vacate from the house because I campaigned and voted for President Akufo-Addo. That makes me to rush, made me rush to Kumasi to rent because I know as a tenant I'll be given more years to stay. And that so if in the event that your landlord or your landlady wants to eject you because you voted for a certain party that he or she doesn't belong to, I mean, how do you go about this?
Okay, so the first point you have to do is to come to the rent control department, because no landlord has the right, if you sign a tenancy agreement and the tenancy has not expired, will forcibly eject you or induce you to move out if your tenancy has not expired. So this is an offense which can be seen under Section 27 of the Rent Act. So the first point of call as a tenant is to go to the nearest rent control office. We invite the landlord and then put the section that the offense that the landlord is committing before him or her as being a landlord or a landlady. And then we try to make peace between the two.
And this one is from Abena Boachiwa from Adenta. She says, good afternoon. My landlady has been quarreling with me and she says I should let the president build for me.
You know, these are mistakes some of the landlords are making. You know, you can build your premises and dwell in personally. No rent act inflicts on you. But when it comes to mine, I want to put it on the commercial platform to get money from it. Then there are rules and regulations that governs this activity or this commercial activity that you want to embark on. So what landlords who have rented houses should take note that immediately they rent their premises out, there are rules and regulations, which is the Rent Act, 1963 Act 220. They should adhere to the regulations or the guidance of this. You can get this online, or you can go to the Ghana Publishing Company and get the Rent Act and read it and understand what are required of you as a landlord, so that you know your rights, you know your responsibility whenever you give a premises to somebody and you take money from that person.
Let's take this one. He didn't add its name. He says, please, I have a tenant who I have. Okay, so this actually not related to election, but rent issues. I have a tenant who I've been with for 3 months and I want to terminate the tenancy. Will the tenant pay for the 3 months he has stayed?
Okay, so we are still sending this caution that there's no free rent in Ghana. If you look at Section 31 of the Rent Act, it states in a nutshell that nothing should stop a landlord from collecting his rent. Nothing at all. So there's no free rent. If you are given a time or it stays in somebody's premises, the law requires that you pay the rent for the duration that you've stayed. So, but if a person has not committed any offense, first we have to establish whether the tenant has committed any offense before you want to evict the person. And you, the landlord, cannot determine. First, report to the rent control. Let's use our expertise to investigate what has gone on before we make an order for the person to vacate your premises.
Quite interesting. A number of people want to know what's the process to go through when your landlord misbehaves with these kinds of attitudes. I'm in party A, my landlord is in party B, and because of that there's a caveat: no noise making. We don't have to see you wearing NDC MPP clothes in the house. You are not supposed to play NDC MPP song in the house. I mean, what do you do when you are faced with these challenges with such landlords?
No, when you are faced with these challenges and the landlords insist that you should not exercise your right moderately, then it constitutes an offense which can be seen under Section 27, which is an offense for inducing tenants to quit. And quickly, every person who shall do any act whatsoever or refrain from doing anything which the condition of the tenancy requires him to do with intent to compel the lessee of the premises to give up possession thereof shall be guilty of an offence, and shall on conviction by the appropriate rent magistrate be liable to a fine not exceeding 50 penalty units or 600 Ghana cedis or 3 months imprisonment. So landlord should take note that if no offense has been committed, you cannot induce somebody because the person belongs to the other side of the party, of your party. You want to induce, do things that to compel the tenant to vacate your premises. It constitutes an offense, and this is the penalty, which, if at the discretion of the magistrate, can combine both the fine and then the imprisonment. So landlords should take note of this. What we are saying is, let's live peacefully. Elections will come and elections will go. But at the end of the day, we will all live together in our premises.
Let's see this one. It's also it's a rent issue, but not really related to election. It says, some landlords and tenants, some tenants will jubilate to some extent, mocking the landlords. But please, I rented in Waliwale and I got transferred to Tamale. Whilst my rent wasn't expired yet, I left some of my staffs at Waliwale, and the landlord broke my room to pack the rest of my stuff out and give it out to someone else. Please ask if the landlord was right or wrong.
No, if you want to base on this narrative, then the landlord has committed an offense, which is very criminal. The process you have to follow, if somebody vacates your premises, we call it an abscondment case or an abscondment process. The abscondment process is where somebody has rented your premises and the date has expired and the person has not handed over your keys to you, but the person's belongings are still in your premises. If the tenancy has not expired and the person's belongings are still there, which means the person is still in possession of your premises, which means you don't have the right to forcefully open the door. The process involved is if somebody has gone, that means the person's tenancy has expired and your keys has not been given to you. You first come to the rent control department. We'll give you a sheet to be pasted on the door or the premises for 2 weeks, inviting the person to come. If the person doesn't come, we go to the court and get order. So the court will give us order to force open the premises, where we will list all the items and then give the items to the landlord for safekeeping for another period. If another 2 weeks or so elapses, we go back to the court to get what we should do with the items, whether we should send it to the children's or whether we should sell and put the money in the consolidated fund or send the money to. So there are processes involved. So landlord whose keys has not been given to them based on the expiration of their tenancy should follow this process. What the landlord has done, if we want to dwell on this case, is a criminal offense. The person can report the case to the police for the police to see how we can solve it. Yeah.
Interesting. And this one, last one says, what do I do if my landlord wants to eject me unlawfully, but there is no tenancy agreement?
Yes. So, you know, you still come to the rent control. But there are 5 basic things that any landlord should take note. The first thing is what we call an assessment. When you build your premises and want to commercialize it, you have to come to the rent control department where we will do an assessment and give you the rate at which you have to charge your premises. When we give you, it's based on when we finish the assessment, we give you a certificate. So within this certificate that will state how much you have to charge for a period of 2 years. So when you get this certificate, that will give you the license to advertise for your premises. And when you advertise, you can advertise through the agent, or you can still come to the rent control where we have a vacant premises register. We put in all your details so that prospective tenants who are roaming to look for accommodation, when they also come and then the accommodation is suit them, we call the 2 of you and link you up. And then when you get the person will pay you money. It has of this money that if it's through the agent, that you take 5% of the rent to the agent. So agents who are taking 10% from prospective tenants and then taking 10% from landlords, it's very wrong, and it's an offense under the
act. It breaches the act.
So when the tenants come to pay, as a landlord, it's your right and responsibility to go to the Ghana Revenue Authority and then pay what we call rent tax. Rent tax, if it's a residential premises, you pay 8% of the rent that the tenant has given you. If it's a commercial venture, you pay 15%. But we have to take note that the maximum rent advance any landlord is required, is mandated to collect in Ghana is 6 months rent advance. The law gives that if it's a short tenancy, you pay monthly. You cannot take more than 2 months. If it's a long tenancy, you pay a maximum of 6 months. Long tenancy, you can sign a tenancy agreement with somebody for 4 years. The law gives you that. But when it comes to the frequency of payment, the maximum the law states is that you have to pay a maximum of 6 months rent advance.
Okay.
So any tenant, the law also states that the landlord has no right to demand or even collect. So any prospective tenant, if a landlord is demanding more than 6 months rent from you, come to the rent control. We've started sanctioning them. We can help to reduce this. And also, what is interesting is that landlords who are collecting more than 6 months are not helping to bring the housing deficit down. Just a narrative. You know, I've gone to take a loan. The loan, you agree, I give you part of the money. Then I go to these real estate developers, put the other half in what they call rent to purchase.
Yeah.
Or even buy a land and then start put a wooden structure on it. So that by the end of my tenancy with you, I can go and start dwelling in my own apartment. Then another person can come, then it will revolve in. By the end of the period, we see that people
will be owning their own
houses. So landlords should just calm down. You cannot build a house and then within a short time, recruit all your money. Housing is a long-term investment. That's what many people don't understand.
And I'm sure this is a conversation that has just begun. We are not done with this conversation yet because we'll see more of these issues coming up. But a lot of education this afternoon. Tenants must not pay 10% to agents and still pay another 10%. Agents should not take 10% from tenants and still take 10%. That's a breach of the law.
It's 5% from the rent that the tenant
from the rent from the tenant. So that means that the landlord should pay that amount and not the tenant. And of course, you cannot pay more than 6 months for your rent. So all of these are things that you should keep in mind whilst you're renting. And this elections also make sure that you jubilate or make noise moderately. Be responsible as you exercise your right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aisha.
Emmanuel Hovi Bosu is the Public Relations Officer of the Rent Control, and he's been engaging us in some very, very interesting exercise.